The bottom floors are all flooded, the walls are peeling, the structure doesn't seem too sound, and there's rust, random papers, books and all kinds of debris lying everywhere. Somebody's in there. At first, when the warrant was issued to search Rick Harrison's house, they thought it was just a routine financial investigation, but when the FBI stepped into the basement of the mansion, they could never have imagined they were opening the gates of a real-life hell behind a thick layer of freshly sealed bricks. They discovered a corpse. As they broke through more of the bricks, the FBI uncovered numerous bodies scattered throughout the basement. The stench was so overwhelming that many agents had to hold their breath, but when they began the process of identification, the truth was fully exposed. The story immediately became the focus of international media, not only because of its horrifying nature but also because the main figure in question was a celebrity once celebrated as a role model for perseverance and business acumen. What could have turned a beloved media figure? The FBI's initial investigation didn't start with a gunshot or a shocking accusation, but rather with a discrepancy in a balance sheet in early 2022 during a routine audit conducted jointly by the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, and the FBI. The discrepancies were minor but recurring, primarily involving cash transactions and goods of unclear origin that caught the investigators' attention. At first, agents thought this was just another typical tax evasion case, one of hundreds involving medium-sized businesses in Nevada trying to take advantage of legal loopholes. However, Rick Harrison wasn't just any businessman, he was the face of the FBI. Antique business in America, a national television star with millions of fans. His shop, which had appeared on television hundreds of times, was renowned for its odd, rare and highly negotiable items. This made the lack of transparency in his financial records all the more unacceptable. If someone hailed as a symbol of business integrity was playing a hidden game, it suggested there might be something far more serious lurking beneath the surface. A special FBI unit in Las Vegas was assigned to monitor the financial activities of the shop more closely. They quickly uncovered a series of suspicious transactions, numerous cash payments ranging from $15,000 to $50,000 with no corresponding invoices, rare items such as ancient Buddhist statues, 13th-century Chinese ceramics and Egyptian artifacts purchased without traceable origins. Alarmingly, some items matched lists of stolen artifacts from museums in Asia, the Middle East and Europe. One particular detail elevated Rick Harrison's case to high-risk status. His name appeared multiple times in Interpol's internal alert system. 3 artifacts previously found at his shop. According to an internal FBI report, the items that were listed as stolen during armed robberies in Syria and Jordan had vanished for conflict zones just months before they appeared in Las Vegas. Meanwhile, investigators started looking through bank data connected to Rick's business and discovered a complicated web of transactions. The money from the sale of artifacts was funneled through multiple layers of accounts, the majority of which were registered to shell companies in BVI and Cyprus, before eventually returning to the U.S. as personal investments in less than 2 years. The estimated amount of repatriated funds was over $4.7 million. The FBI's viewpoint changed. They no longer saw this as a separate financial fraud case, but rather as a possible massive money laundering scheme, with Rick Harrison at its core. Investigators started broadening their investigations into the FBI placed Rick under covert surveillance for the next 6 months, focusing on his personal residence, a sprawling 1,000-square-meter mansion on the western outskirts of Las Vegas secured with a state-of-the-art security system. Despite the fact that there was no direct evidence linking Rick to serious crimes, the sheer number of coincidences led to the startling discovery that at least 5 people who had directly interacted with Rick in high-value transactions had gone missing between 2017 and 2021. Notably, none of these cases were ever mentioned in Rick's official records. Backgrounds and had previously been under investigation for involvement in the black market trade of antiquities. Additionally, the mansion contained at least 3 heavily fortified areas that were not documented in the original building plans, a detail that could only be explained by the need to conceal something or avoid detection. The FBI obtained a search warrant on April 17, 2024. Rick Harrison's mansion was raided. What was discovered inside not only shocked the investigative team but sent Shock waves across the entire United States. No one could have predicted that what began as minor financial discrepancies would open the door to a case of mass murder accompanied by a slew of charges ranging from money laundering and artifact smuggling to orchestrating a global criminal network. Most of all, the revelations shattered the carefully curated public image of Rick Harrison, the likable antique mogul, exposing an entirely different person beneath the surface. On one hand, he was the beloved TV figure with a charming smile and encyclopedic knowledge on the FBI raided the mansion in the early hours of April 17, 2024, expecting to find documents, financial evidence, and possibly smuggled drugs. On the outside, it appeared to be an ordinary property, spanning over 2 acres, with tall iron gates, a private tree-lined perimeter, a large pool in the backyard, and a garage big enough for 4 luxury vehicles. However, on the inside, it was a nightmare designed by an architect. He was at the center of the most horrific criminal case ever to emerge from America's reality television industry. Artifacts, but no one was mentally ready for what was waiting for them behind the heavily locked doors. From the moment investigators entered the mansion, there was an unmistakable sense of unease. The interiors, although opulent, felt cold, not in temperature, but in spirit, as if no one actually lived there. Many rooms were covered in heavy curtains and showed signs of being sealed off or locked in an odd way, and on the ground floor, police found several large wooden crates hidden in the wine cellar, a room that was only accessible by the property owner. These crates did not contain wine, but rather rare artifacts, some wrapped in velvet that bore the emblems of museums from the Middle East, Asia, and North Africa. The majority of these items lacked legal documentation, and many of them matched descriptions of items stolen in armed heists between 2016 and 2022. However, the true horror began when an agent stumbled upon a secret room concealed behind a false wall in Rick's private library. The small windowless room was eerily quiet and completely sealed. Inside was a decomposing corpse wrapped in a tarp. While the body carried no identification, it was accompanied by an antique watch later confirmed to belong to a collector who had been missing since 2019. This discovery triggered the FBI's special protocol. The entire mansion was sealed off. Forensic teams were deployed in full force and the search warrant was expanded over the next 48 hours. 24 additional bodies were unearthed, some hidden in the basement storage, others buried beneath hollow floorboards, and several concealed in areas that were not part of the mansion's original blueprint, indicating they had been illegally constructed by Rick Harrison to hide the dead. All the bodies were in various stages of decomposition, with some having been there for over 5 years according to forensic reports. Most of the victims were men aged 30 to 50. Some were identified as individuals reported missing from neighboring states, while others could not be immediately identified due to the loss of fingerprints or soft tissue. Disturbingly, many of the victims had one thing in common: they were either connected to the gold and silver pawn shop or had business dealings with Rick in illicit artifact trades. At the scene, investigators also uncovered hundreds of handwritten notes believed to be Rick's personal journal. These notes detailed his emotion, evaluations, and intention toward individuals he had interacted with in major business deals. Some of the entries were chilling: he knows too much, can't be trusted, must deal with him soon, high risk but the reward is worth the gamble. These words led investigators to a grim conclusion: Rick Harrison was not just a businessman engaged in criminal activities, he could very well be a calculated, methodical serial killer. Another haunting discovery was what has been dubbed the secret gallery, a soundproofed space deep in the basement entirely isolated from the central. Investigators discovered strange items, photographs of the victims, their personal belongings, some ID cards, and even objects that seemed to be trophies taken after their disappearances. Some have called this a twisted memorial, but to the FBI, it was unquestionably proof of a psychological pattern of cyclical killing, a mechanism through which the perpetrator preserved the memory and power over each victim. When Rick Harrison was arrested, one agent claimed that he did not panic but rather stood quietly as police sealed off the house that had once been a symbol of his success. This unnerving calmness only served to support the theory that Rick's actions were planned and calculated, that he knew exactly what he was doing and had hidden it for years without detection, even from his family and closest associates. The public was shocked by the national sensation that a popular television personality who was trusted and admired by millions of people had lived a double life for more than 10 years. Media outlets flocked to Las Vegas with cameras and reporters at the gates of the mansion, which had once been a lavish retreat but was now the scene of one of the most horrific cases in reality television history. The more investigators dug deeper, the more they discovered that Rick Harrison had turned his own home into a repository of deadly secrets, a place where the truth about his empire based not just on wealth and knowledge but also on blood and silence was concealed. What horrified the public was not only the total number of victims, 25, but also the fact that Rick had lived with their remains as if they didn't exist, as if death itself had become a normal part of the brutal negotiations that characterized his decades-long career in the treacherous world of antique dealing. And so the question lingers like a knife left twisting in the collective psyche: how could one man maintain two lives, one in the spotlight of television, the other in the cold shadows of calculated murder, for nearly a decade without anyone noticing? 3. The revelation of the underground criminal network. When the search of Rick Harrison's mansion concluded, investigators realized that what they had uncovered was merely the tip of an iceberg. And the submerged part might be far deeper and more expansive than they had imagined. The bodies discovered could not simply be the result of a lone madman's rebellion or a bout of uncontrollable rage. Everything was too systematic, too quiet, too perfect. This led the FBI to an assumption that demanded verification. Rick Harrison was not just a murderer, he was the linchpin of an organization, an international criminal network where antiquities served as a cover and human lives were the price paid to protect the operation. Analysis of electronic data retrieved from the mansion, including hard drives, personal servers, and encrypted phones, revealed a closed communication system utilizing anonymous platforms like Encroat and SkyECC. The FBI, in collaboration with Europol, decrypted the data and discovered hundreds of messages sent directly from Rick's devices. These messages contained unmistakable details: delivery locations, artifact codes, value symbols, and cryptic payment terms such as gold, black rice grains, and blood count slang used in transactions involving illegal antiquities. Among Rick's known contacts, at least 12 individuals were identified as having criminal records related to artifact smuggling. These individuals were members of organized crime groups operating in Turkey, Iraq, Egypt, and the Balkans. Notably, 2 of them, referred to by the nicknames Farouk and Sman, were on Interpol's Red Notice list. According to an internal report from 2020, these 2 suspects were believed to have orchestrated the theft of nearly 300 artifacts from Syria's National Museum during the Civil War. The fact that Rick Harrison communicated directly with them, negotiated prices, and arranged deliveries established his central role within this network. Even more disturbingly, the FBI discovered that Rick was not merely purchasing rare artifacts, he was directly involved in laundering these items, determining their legal feasibility, and finding ways to legitimize them before they were brought to market. In other words, Rick served not only as a financial conduit but also as a professional consultant, making him an indispensable figure in the network. According to the FBI, the smuggling operation followed a triangular model: supply sources primarily from unstable regions in the Middle East and Eastern Europe, distribution intermediaries, key hubs in Europe, notably in France, Switzerland, and Belgium, and markets mainly the US and China. Rick served as the gateway in the United States, utilizing his pawn shop, gold and silver, as a laundering point. Rick Harrison is thought to have legitimized at least 147 valuable artifacts between 2016 and 2023 by bringing them into the U.S. under the guise of a legitimate collection and then selling them to ultra-wealthy collectors through private auctions or discreetly. These items included an ancient lion sculpture from Armenia, a Buddha statue from the 6th century that was stolen from northern India, 2 bronze wine vessels from the Zhou dynasty in China, and an almost intact copy of the Egyptian Book of the Dead that was thought to have been looted from Luxor in 2011. According to international law, these artifacts were prohibited from commercial circulation, but Rick's reputation as an expert allowed him to get around verification systems. The network of PRA operated in total secrecy, with payments made through intermediaries, and goods accompanied by forged documents produced in workshops in Romania or Hong Kong, and those who dared to oppose or question Rick Harrison's operation simply disappeared their bodies. Currently, 25 victims have been found in the mansion he built with the proceeds of these crimes. One notable case is that of Javier Montes, a Spanish collector who, according to his wife, disappeared in Las Vegas in 2020 after meeting Rick. Javier had expressed concern about the dubious origins of certain artifacts Rick had offered him, and shortly after that, he vanished without a trace. His remains were identified as one of the 25 victims found in Rick's mansion after Valerie Chen, a freelance Canadian journalist who had written critical articles about how U.S. porn shops could exploit legal loopholes to traffic. Valerie Chen, a freelance Canadian journalist who had attempted to interview Rick, but vanished 4 months later in Nevada, and the FBI confirmed that one of the female bodies found in Rick's estate. In a journal found during the search, Rick wrote, "To keep the gold you must bury the diggers deep." The FBI investigation also showed that Rick did not act alone, he had accomplices who either knew or at least suspected parts of the truth. Several prominent figures in the antiquities industry were subpoenaed, including a renowned museum advisor in New York and an auction expert who had previously worked for Sotheby's. These individuals were suspected of helping to authenticate the provenance of questionable artifacts, even though no formal charges had been brought against them. The list of suspects kept growing even though no formal charges had been brought against them. He appeared on TV as a man passionate about history, curious and calm. He hosted talks, participated in exhibitions and maintained his good relationships with reputable historical organizations. Any suspicion directed at him was quickly dismissed with skepticism. Rick Harrison, a smuggler? Impossible. The other part lies in the nature of the antiquities trade itself. In this world the line between legal and illegal is often blurred. Few items have perfectly traceable origins, and authentication frequently relies on personal credibility rather than objective documentation. Rick in this case was both a player in the system and a rewriter of its rules. The revelation of this network turned Rick Harrison's case into more than a personal scandal. It opened a new chess chapter in the global fight against cultural smuggling, where criminals no longer wear masks but don suits, stand on television stages and smile as they talk about history's value. When the FBI released its first pieces of evidence, the American public was not only appalled by the 25 bodies, but also by a more significant and disturbing question: how many people, how many artifacts, and how many museums are part of a network where Rick Harrison is only the dragon's head? Rick Harrison's double life on television. Rick Harrison was a well-liked figure who portrayed himself as a calm, collected businessman who handled situations with poise and extensive knowledge of everything from Roman coins to firearms from the Civil War. Rick presented himself as a kind scholar who not only evaluated objects but also shared the stories behind them.